Okay guys, I made a Titan Thundercrash build, but I have never before paired a Thundercrash build with a Consecration Slam build, and you know, it's kinda insane how both builds are merged into one, because what you're seeing here is expert adds being completely obliterated by Consecration, which after a few slams can pretty much get you an entire super. So with this build, you're not only going to be having infinite Consecration melees for effective ad clear, even in content whilst massively underpowered, but you're also going to be getting multiple Thundercrash supers per minute because of that, which did also get buffed, so it's now pulling off even more damage than ever before. And when you have good ad clear paired with good boss damage, and then paired with high survivability, the build literally isn't even S tier, it's God tier. With this build, you'll be getting faster supers, infinite melee abilities, you'll also become transcendent, which is going to make the build even more wild. And to top that off, you're going to have a bunch of artifact perks from this season, which you can boost if you choose to using Tonics. So the build can only get stronger from here. This build is more effective for solo players, but regardless of where you use the build and who you use it with, doesn't massively affect the build too much. All you gotta do is get melee kills and use your super on that rotation. Now, as we get into the video, I will explain what we're using and how the gameplay loop works, so you can follow along at your own pace, or you can just take the dim link below and be on your way. But without further delay guys, let's go punch some ads in the face. Roll that classic Thundercrash intro. Now before we jump into the build, I will mention that the full playlist of new and updated builds is linked down below, which currently only has this video and one other build in there as of today, but give it a few weeks, check it out, and you might just find your new best build in there. But with this one today, it is your new OP Titan Arc build, but redesigned and reformatted to work on the Prismatic subclass. Now I did try using the Arc subclass, but the main problem I encountered with that was the lack of consistent melee charges that would kill groups of ads, because the Arc melee abilities just aren't that great on its own, without certain exotics like Skullfort to refund melee energy. And even with the help of Monte Carlo to generate melee energy, it still just wasn't that good against endgame enemies. Now you might be wondering why we care so much about our melee ability. Well, that's because our core exotic for this build that we're using is the buffed out Cuirass of the Fallen Star. This used to just buff the Thundercrash's base damage, but now it not only buffs its damage, but it also gives us super energy on melee kills while amplified, whether that's an uncharged melee attack or a fully charged melee ability. So our primary focus will be two things: ensuring that we have a good strong melee ability that will kill multiple ads consistently in both expert and master content whilst underpowered, and ensuring that we have that ability up as much as possible. So the solution I found to achieve that was to run the Prismatic subclass with the Frenzied Blade Strand melee ability, the Consecration aspect paired with Knockout, and a Monte Carlo. With these four things, this will ensure that we can freely roam around with basically infinite melee abilities that also has a huge area of effect range that's powerful enough to kill tough ads. So basically, the way this gameplay loop works is you'd run into a bunch of ads, slide melee and slam to the ground, killing everything around you. This would make you amplified and therefore give you super energy, and because we would have 3 of these charges, you'd do basically the same thing but to 3 different groups of ads, or as many times as you need until you get that super. You would then use your super and then rinse and repeat. If you don't have any charges left, you would then just use Monte Carlo to damage or kill enemies, which has a high chance to give melee energy and also refund the entire ability. So just a few simple kills or a bit of time damaging enemies should recharge those abilities. You're not always going to be perfect with this build. There will be times where you don't get your super back quickly, or you miss multiple times with an ability, or you might even die or whatever. That's fine, just do your best and do what you can. You will hit hard, but you gotta remember that in endgame activities, enemies will hit you back just as hard, so play it safe when you have to. Now when it comes to using exotics, you ultimately have 2 choices, which will be in the kinetic slot, and that's important because we're using Prismatic, so we'll take advantage of kinetic weapon damage to build Transcendence energy. So you can go with things like a Bad Juju to get extra super energy passively on top of the super energy that you get from melee kills while amplified. That is one of your options, although after playing around a bit more with that setup, I've come to decide that it's far more efficient to just use Monte Carlo instead. So that instead of generating super energy from weapon kills, you'll generate it from the melee kills. And then those weapon kills and hits from Monte Carlo will regenerate that melee, so it just loops constantly like that. And because in harder content you're not going to quickly kill ads with Monte Carlo, that doesn't actually matter, and in fact that can sometimes be a good thing, because that constant damage will still charge your melee but at the same time refuel your Transcendence energy for both light and dark. And once you become Transcendent, that's literally it. Literally, you're just going to have those melees even quicker for quite some time, on top of having a damage resistance buff, without having to worry about getting Monte Carlo kills and hits once you run out of those charges, because it charges so quickly that the weight just doesn't even matter at all. For exotic armor, you do want to use Cuirass of the Fallen Star, because this did get buffed as I mentioned, and this will just boost your Thundercrash's damage and give you it back quicker from those melee kills. I would avoid using other exotic armor because the build is primarily focused on this specific exotic, so if you don't want to run this, then I strongly recommend just getting a different build altogether. I will have some other good dedicated Arc and Prismatic builds later on, so you can always stay tuned for those when I do get around to making them, since there are quite a lot of potentially good builds this season. Within the Prismatic subclass, make sure that you're using the Thundercrash Super, since that is a core part of the build. And for the abilities, I just have a Thruster class ability, the Frenzied Blade Strand melee ability. This one again is required if you do want to use the build to make it as effective as possible, and then the grenade is just going to be a pulse grenade. You don't have to use the pulse, but it is ideal as it will benefit from other things later on. For the aspects, you want Consecration and Knockout. Now Consecration will just allow you to have that big area of effect slam, so that will be our primary melee ability. And because we're using the Strand melee, we will get 3 charges to use. Knockout on the other hand will buff our melee range and damage when critically wounding targets or breaking shields, but more importantly give us health on kills for better survivability and make us amplified. So because we are going to be amplified from that will then give us a ton of super energy when we do get those kills from the melee ability. For fragments, you want Facet of Hope so that class abilities regenerate more quickly, just handy for reducing cooldowns of other abilities when using mods. Facet of Dawn so that powered melee hits against targets make you radiant. This one just gives our Monte Carlo a 25% damage buff, but also since there are no anti-champion auto rifles this season, we can use that radiant buff to take down barrier shields too, so it just makes it a good choice in endgame content this season. Our third fragment is going to be the Facet of Dominance, so that our grenades jolt targets, the arc grenades, so that will just come from the pulse one, the pulse grenade, and that again will also give us an option to stun overload champions. I wouldn't use the void one to weaken enemies because it's just not really that great, so just stick with the arc one for a free overload grenade. Our fourth fragment though is going to be Facet of Purpose, and this is so that we can become amplified when picking up orbs. You don't need this, but it is just an extra way to become amplified. Then our last fragment we have is going to be Facet of Protection, so that we are more resistant to incoming damage when surrounded. And since we are a melee build, we're mostly always going to be in the center of all that action, so it's definitely a good fragment to have on. When it comes to choosing artifact perks, there are a few that you want. For buffing our DPS, I'd go with these 4 grenade launcher perks and use a good grenade launcher like an Edge Transit with Bait and Switch and Envious. This is just going to allow us to deal a ton of damage to bosses with GLs, but also weaken them as well, so we can then go in with our Thundercrash and completely obliterate them. The other artifact perk that I'd use is the Conductive Cosmic Crystal. This is so that your arc abilities deal more damage to enemies affected by a stasis debuff, so if you're using weapons that can apply stasis debuffs like a slow effect, or just have a teammate doing that for you, then you will be able to pull off even more damage with your Thundercrash. And I believe with all those buffs active at the same time, Thundercrash will now have the highest damage of all supers in the entire game, so it is definitely worth using if you want to achieve the most damage on your team. And bear in mind that you can even buff that effect using tonic boosts if you manage to craft the correct one for that artifact perk. When it comes to mods, 2 hands-on in the helmet is definitely what you want on, since we are a melee and super build, but also a Cypher mod to generate some orbs. In the arms, we have a heavy-handed and impact induction. This is just going to help generate more orbs and also reduce our grenade cooldown. For the chest, use your damage resist mods that you need on for the activity that you're going into. Legs, I have more cooldown mods, but change one of them to a scavenger one for your heavy weapon, just so you can get more heavy ammo when you're doing things like a raid or dungeon. Then lastly for the class, I'm going with a distribution and 2 bombers. Stat distribution, resilience, discipline and strength being maxed out is your ideal triple 100 build in that order. I wouldn't worry too much if you can't get strength to 100 because Monte Carlo will do most of the work anyway, but it just helps a bit more if you do have that stat up a bit. Anyway, here is the build infographic that I have set up for this version of the build. So if you want a dedicated written guide, then you can check out that on Mobalytics and get a bit more support over there on build crafting. Otherwise, that is all for this build as a new Titan Arc Prismatic build for Destiny 2 Episode Revenant this season for Season 25. Next, you guys should check out the full playlist down below for more top, fun and new builds like this, as I do cover them every season here on the channel, and you might just find your new favourite build. Otherwise guys, give this one a try, and I'll see you soon for the next build video.